This is the Chris in Retro podcast. Part 1 of Chris's conversation with Mitch Smiley starts now.
Well, welcome back to Chris in Retro. My guest today is Mitch Smiley. You may not have heard of Mitch, but he's got quite a history here that I couldn't wait to connect you with. Some things, he's an artist, tattoo artist, big history fan, I guess. You self-proclaimed history fan of World War II. And,
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and you'll see him around. He's been on Cinemills, which is actually a cool new show. I saw you on there, and that was a pretty impressive interview. But the thing about Mitch, has a history that cost him 38 years of his life in the California prison system. He has a YouTube channel called Hard Intentions. And for a lot of reasons, I was really glad that Mitch agreed to be on the show. I see him as a person that's fair and straight on what he talks about. And so welcome to the show, Mitch. Thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me.
No problem. The audience here, we're going to have a mixed audience, and there's a lot of times in our life when we're living high risk living and collapse is closer than it seems. And that's one of the things we try to talk on here. And, your life has had a lot of ups and downs. And I'd really if we could just start, where early on, what does it look like for you?
Well, early on, I was a kid. I grew up in San Diego, but I was born in San Jose. My dad split. The guy I thought was my father split when I was about a year and a half old. My mom married my stepdad. He was a Korean War veteran, an alcoholic, and a roofer, and kind of abusive. That's where it starts. As far back, it's my early memories. But moved to San Diego. I don't know anyone. No family in San Diego, and there we are, brand new housing tract out in the hills. And, mom and dad work all day. Dad comes home, half time he's drunk. And, alcoholics, some days they're nice and some days they're mean, and so mean days, you get your ass beat for not picking up the last piece of dog shit in the backyard or doing one of your chores, leads to an ass whooping, and I grew up in a time, I guess, where households like mine, kids are to be seen, not heard, So, my thing was I'd come home, do my chores and split. I'd run around the neighborhood, eat dinner and go back to the neighborhood and run around, until it was time to go in for the night. Right. That was my deal, so.
I think we didn't grow up in different times there. I didn't have the same situation. My upbringing, I was more out in the country, but it's the same thing. Your entertainment wasn't sitting in front of video games or anything else. You were out.
Yeah. But, part of my getting out of the house was to get away from my parents, really. My mom was kind of narcissistic, wrapped up in her own little, my mom grew up, she was like the women's lib kind of. She ended up divorcing my stepdad, but, she was wrapped up in her life working. And so my thing was just, I'd be in the house as little as possible just to get away from them. And if I was out running the streets, it meant no ass whooping at the house, so.
Gotcha. So do you have any mentors that would enter your life at that point? Was there anybody in your community that was reaching out to a young man like you to say, here?
Yeah. We had a lot of motorcycle riders in my neighborhood, guys who rode, Harley Davidson type, choppers. And we had a few guys in motorcycle clubs. And, like my friend's sister was girlfriends with guys. And so you meet guys like that. It's night and day, here's this guy, dirty, filthy biker, right? Everyone's talking bad about, see him on the news, and they're like, hey, kid, what's up? And they're polite, respectful, treating you with respect. And it's like, how come I'm not getting this at home, right?
Sure.
There was a guy down the street, too, that he was an aircraft mechanic, and he built racing go-karts and all kinds of shit. And so had a couple Corvettes, so I used to, rubberneck his garage, and he's like, hey, want to mow my weeds? He had a brand new housing track. He never planted no grass. He just had weeds. So I mowed his weeds for him. And then, I ended up knowing him for quite a few years. He used to take me out. We'd fly radio controlled airplanes, and he was a pretty cool guy. And later on, I found out he learned the aircraft mechanic trade while he was in prison at DVI, Tracy Prison. So it was, I had a few mentors like that. But what's funny is they were guys that society kind of frowns on, the outlaw biker kind of guy. And, but they were the kind of guys I grew up aspiring to be. Right. So.
Yeah. And I think that that's what happens a lot, though, is, we do bucket people. We say this is what's right and what's wrong. Or, even in politics, it's kind of absurd, the amount of suits that tell us, one thing and lie right out of their face. And that's supposedly, more of something to aspire to than somebody in your community taking you under their wing. Now,
right.
So where does, it sounds like, that's I think a common story for young men growing up when they don't have fathers. Where do things get sideways? Because that doesn't, in and of itself right now, it doesn't sound like anything really too crazy.
Yeah, like my mom and dad got divorced. My stepdad, they got divorced, and up to that point, it was like a heavy-handed control over me as a kid. And so now, I'm home by myself after school or during the summer all day, and I'm running around the neighborhood, and I'm like, there's no more control over me, really. And I started smoking weed, and looking back now, I mean, I didn't realize it because I was a kid, but I was like a lot of questions in my head, like, who's my dad?
Mm-hmm.
And why did I get, why would the situation that I grew up in, I didn't understand. So you have a lot of hurtful, painful shit going on inside you, and you just kind of stuff it, right? Because another part of growing up is where I grew up was, violence, fighting. Mostly as kids, it was fighting. You have a problem, you can't solve it, you fight it out, and then I started hanging out with a few guys that were into smoking weed. So it was all about smoking weed, drinking. And I was probably about 12 and 11, 12 around there. And, you hear all the horror stories back then about drugs and marijuana, it was the 60s, early 70s. But then you start smoking weed and drinking, you go, well, this isn't like they say it is. So, and the guys doing it all seemed cool, and I always hung out with, I was a big kid, so I hung out with older guys. I was in junior high school by then, and was hanging out with guys in high school and older, guys that were into motorcycles, yeah. So I got in trouble, and they sent me to juvenile hall a couple times. Basically being an incorrigible juvenile delinquent. And then I go to juvenile hall, and I grew up in an area that was almost all white. And then we had a Native American, reservation on the outside of town, Verona. There's really no minorities outside of that. A few Mexican guys, but I always thought the Mexican cats were just like us. I never even realized they were Mexican,
Right.
Now I'm in juvenile hall, and I'm around guys from downtown San Diego area, the ghettos, blacks, righteous, Chicano type neighborhood, barrios. I'd never been exposed to that. And now fighting in juvenile hall was more, it's a little more serious, and it's a little more, who's the manliest man of the kids, And,
so that was probably your first exposure to politics.
Yeah, really not politics, but more like, hey, these guys are different than us, and they don't like us. So you got to figure out what's the end of towards the end of the Black Power movements of the '60s, and Screw Whitey, and I didn't understand any of that shit. I was a kid. I didn't really know anything about any of that stuff. I was just a kid. But they grew up around it, so it's kind of us against them kind of thing. And of course, us was outnumbered by them. So, I got out of there, got in trouble some more, started taking LSD, which is a totally new deal, and speed. They had whites back then, which were, cross tops, pills, Well, living in San Diego, we got all the drugs that came over the border from Mexico, just like now.
Okay.
But back then it wasn't fentanyl and all this crap. It was just, amphetamines, barbiturates, marijuana. I started getting in, taking reds, they don't make barbiturates anymore, but they're downers and they make you kind of violent,
Mm-hmm.
I was, to me, growing up, drugs were to party with, have fun, and make money. And the mentality I grew up with was, if shooting dope was against the rules, and I learned that at an early age in the motorcycle biker culture,
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, if you're using drugs and you're not having fun and you're not making money, then you're just a fucking drug addict, right? So that was the mentality of the people that I grew up around.
Right.
And so I thought I was having a blast, but really I was really, you look back, you kind of realize you were just stuffing your problems away and covering it up with drug use and alcohol. And,
right.
And, you're associating with people, we live in a lower middle class area, so it was kind of, it's Lakeside's out in the country, and especially back then, everybody has horses. They have a rodeo out there. Like I said, we had a reservation and right out on the outskirts of town. So it would be like a country ghetto,
Well, being from Western New York, I think everything Southern California is overpopulated. So I was kind of surprised to hear that's how it was.
Yeah, well, now it's really overpopulated. That whole area is quite different now. But back then it was wide open. San Diego used to be called a sleepy little beach town.
Not anymore.
But,
so you had sound like that, things were building up to that point. Was there anything in your head that was kind of saying this could have I might be heading down a road that could have a bad outcome?
Not at all. I got in some more trouble and they sent me to youth authority, which is like, so juvenile hall, that kind of stuff, that's all county. Youth authority is a state run. It's on the level of prison, but it's for youth,
Mm-hmm.
So I got a 6 to 9 month sentence. And I went to youth authority, and it was not good. I got in a lot of trouble. And that's when I kind of experienced guys telling on you, like I was down in I was done my 6 months, and I'm like, yeah, they're going to let me go pretty
Mm-hmm.
soon. And some guys broke into the little store on the unit and blamed it on me. And I'm like, the counselors are like, hey, we heard you're the guy that broke into the store and stole all the tobacco. And I'm like, what the fuck? So they're talking about giving me more time. And back then they didn't have to take you to court, nothing. They could just extend your time indefinitely if they felt like it. So you're a ward of the state, and I was like, screw this, this is bullshit. I didn't do that. And so me and this friend of mine decided we were going to escape. And so I live in a dorm. Yeah, the dorms there, I lived in a dorms with like 3 or 4 white guys, 25, 30 blacks, 15, 20 Mexicans. So we were, once again, now I'm surrounded by guys from Los Angeles, gangs.
Right.
The Crips, Bloods were still brand new then. They were kind of just, since 1974, 75. And it was fighting, getting rat packed, all the time. So more violence,
Mm-hmm.
Lifting weights, trying to get strong, trying to be able to stand up for yourself. And so, yeah, me and my friend decided we were going to escape. And I had this chessboard that was made in the wood shop. It was pretty thick, made out of wood. And so we decided we're going to knock the night man out and take his keys, and, you know, tie him up. And, you know, so he was walking down the middle of the dorm, and I got out of bed and beat him in the head with his chessboard. I turned around to get a rope and tie him up, and turned back around, and he had ran to the office. He was on the phone, you know, get Smiley, you know, it was all right. So I got I got in trouble for that.
I would think so.
Yeah, I picked up quite a bit more time, and you know, I ended up doing like 2.5 years on that 6 months, 6 to 9 month
So
sentence.
it sounds to me like every one of your rehabilitation programs just taught you how to prepare for a life. I mean, just as an observation, I hadn't heard the detail of these stories yet, but it sounds like you were kind of leveling up each time to get ready for what life was going to have for you. If you look
Yeah,
at,
and you know, I didn't realize it at the time, but yeah, that's, you know, you go into a situation as a kid and you've never been in before, and
right.
you know, like when I went to Nellis, you know, I had an 8-track player, and as soon as I got there, you know, I put it in my locker, and somebody stole it. And I had a friend there from juvenile hall, George Miller. He's passed away since, but I said, hey, somebody took my 8-track player. He's like, you got to get it back, and he goes, if you don't get it back, you don't do something about it, they're going to take everything you got.
Hmm.
That was, you know, so I got it back, you know.
Talk about
But
early lessons.
yeah, I mean, right off the bat. So
Yeah.
yeah, every step of the way in youth authority, it got, because I went to places that were older people each time, and I was always the youngest guy there. And before I got out on that, I went to a place, Paso Robles, and I had a homeboy there that had gotten into some issues with somebody, and you know, and California Youth Authority prisons, it's very racial. The blacks, Mexicans, whites stick to their own. I mean, you can talk to people and all that stuff, but it's pretty much, it's very racist, you know, very separated
You're
by
saying in the
race.
youth authority or in the corrective system across the whole state?
The whole state,
Yeah.
prison and youth
Yep.
authorities like that. Yeah, I got to Paso Robles. I had 6 months left. I you know, I had a release date. I beat some guys up, and I lost the release date for 6 months. And so my homeboy Ricky had gotten into some issues with some guys, and they worked in the chow hall, and he was kind of a tough guy. He grew up the same way I did, went through the same youth authorities I did, and he was a tough guy. And so he beat this guy up, and they were mad at him, and so I went to the chow, and I told one of them, hey, if you fuck with my homeboy, I'm gonna stab you. So now I went from fighting, getting rat packed and fighting, and to, you know, weapons, you know, and I, next thing I know, they came and took me to they had a lockup unit they call the hole. They had a program side and a lockup side,
Mm-hmm.
and they took me over there. I was 16, I think 15, 16. I did my last 6 months in the program side of the Cambria was a unit. Very restricted program. And the night before I got out, the Protestant chaplain came down and told me that he goes, I'm the one that had you put in here. I guess when I threatened that guy, some of them went to the Protestant chaplain. They were tight with him and told him, hey, this guy, you know, told about me. And he reviewed my file, and he said, you know, you came in here for 6 months and you've done a couple years, and I wanted to see you go home. And I knew if you stayed out there, you were going to get more time, more violence. And so I'm like, yeah, okay. You know, I got out. Yeah, I stayed out probably 4 months, and I got another case. That 4 months was just strictly, you know, I got kicked out of continuation school. I beat up a couple of teachers, principal, body slammed the principal, you know,
So
just
you were,
angry.
sounds like the system and you were both on autopilot. You were in the same dance, just a different environment over and over again.
Right.
They don't exist if you don't exist, you know, and in a lot of ways, it sounds
And
like,
the thing is, you know, there's no one there to say, hey, check this out. You're going down a fucked up path, and this is, what's going on. This is a better direction to go.
So I think, that's the part though that I was going to ask you about later in the interview as well, but let's get into it now. We haven't quite got to really where the big turning point was, but I think that too. If somebody just got ahead of me in my head, or people I'm talking to, if somebody just got it to them a little earlier, but would we have listened? I mean, what would have had to have been said to you for you to get it, and who would have had to present that to you for even to listen?
Well, I don't know at that point. I think, I was like 16, so almost 16. I think it's 15, turning 16. You're becoming a young man, and I think some of the guys that I looked up to, they were, I just saw them as tough guys that were selling dope and partying and drinking and riding motorcycles, and I just looked at them as tough guys. So I'm trying to emulate that behavior and that lifestyle. And I think really if some, adult figure would have stepped in and said, hey, shown some respect, shown some concern, spent some time with me. Like, hey, there's a different direction. I might have listened,
It almost is, and that's why I'm a big fan of peer programs. So somebody that's actually walked in your shoes and come alongside people who have seen them work better than any other type of program.
Right.
It would almost have taken somebody that was in a position that you believed in from those organizations that you were hanging around with to actually step back and say, you don't need to go down this road. It's not as glamorous. It can end here. If I was in your shoes, it's probably all I would have listened to, because that's all you were looking towards.
Yeah, and other people don't know, what's going on inside your head, and what's, what your home life is, and what your, which they don't know, what
Right.
your emotions are, what kind of stuff's driving your behavior. And a lot of them that are involved with that type of lifestyle, they might have gone through some of the same crap I went through, and they never learned how to deal with it either.
That's true too. They just got into a program to try to feel like they were doing something different. I look
yeah,
at,
I stayed out 4 months. I got in some violent situations, and I ended up beating a couple guys up with a friend of mine at a pool hall, and I got another year in youth authority, and I was like, shit, So I went to Preston School of Industry, and it's like one step prior to going to prison, And I was 16 when I got there. I was the youngest guy there. They put me on a unit with some of the oldest guys, and it's like they test you, see if you can fight, see how you're gonna act, and all that kind of shit. And I spent a year there. I ended up paroling once again from the program side of the hole. Saw my first stabbing. They had northern Mexicans, southern Mexicans there, and I'd never really been around that much. And so one day going to chow, this Southsider started stabbing this dude in front of me, and stabbed another guy in front of him. And then the third guy ran around the building, and he chased him around the building and stabbed him. I was like, wow.
he was committed.
It was committed,
Yeah.
and you're already conditioned, like, to act normal and act like it's no big deal. And, but I was like, wow, that's pretty serious shit,
Mm-hmm.
So more violence, and now I'm exposed to like criminal shit. Like, I never knew nothing about heroin or cocaine, or I've been taking pills, smoking dope, LSD, drinking. Now I'm around guys that are talking about selling heroin, shooting heroin, all this kind of shit, and I'm like, well, I know that's not good. It's against the rules, and I paroled from there. Angry, mad, full of shit, thinking, okay, now I'm going to go down a gangster road,
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for watching part 1 of Chris's conversation with Mitch Smiley. Part 2 is coming soon. Please remember to like, share, rate, and review the Chris and Retro podcast.